Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Debrief here on FingerLakes1.com. We hope everyone had a happy and successful Thanksgiving and, of course, a safe start to the holiday shopping season, too. Mr. Ted Baker is back with us on the program. You can hear him Monday through Friday on Finger Lakes News Radio. He hosts Finger Lakes Morning News on several local radio stations, including WGVA and WAUB, part of the Finger Lakes Radio Group family. Before we get into today's discussion, though, I'd like to remind our listeners that it's your turn to be part of the show. Last week, our phone line opened up officially for viewers and listeners of the Debrief here on FingerLakes1.com. And so far, we've been overwhelmed with a lot of positive feedback, a lot of messages. We're going to start incorporating them into the program over the next several weeks. If you would like to leave a message or even a question for a future episode, it's 866-315-FLX1. That's 866-315-3591. You can also email the show at debrief@fingerlakes1.com. Welcome back, Ted. Obviously, it hasn't been very long. It's only been a couple weeks.
Always a pleasure. It's fun.
Yeah. So how was your Thanksgiving, first and foremost?
Good. We're homebodies, so we don't travel. We stayed home and had a nice meal and watched a little bit of football and avoided going outside where it was freezing cold.
And you talked about that this week on your program. Not a lot of people do travel, ironically enough. There's always a lot of hype about a lot of traveling, but not that many people actually travel.
Well, we've been making fun of the media because this is probably one of the slower news weeks of the year for actual news. So we get stories about traveling, and they said 50 million Americans are going to travel. So you do the math, 280 million aren't. So, and if you are, how much difference does it make when they got somebody telling you about the conditions at the Orlando airport when you're flying United through Chicago?
And it's funny too, because like they'll show you watch CNN or even some of the local broadcasts, they'll show the airports, and they don't look that like they all handle traffic well.
Well, somebody pointed this out. I don't remember where I read this, but basically they don't run any more flights than they do any other time. And if you've flown much around America in recent years, almost every flight's full anyway. So essentially airline traffic the day before Thanksgiving is pretty much like it is any Wednesday all year.
Oh, that's funny.
There's the weather factor, so you may have some flights diverted if there's snow in Denver or something. But really, in terms of actual traffic, I don't think it's that much different.
So obviously today we're recording this on Black Friday. The whole Shop Local Saturday is tomorrow, and then Cyber Monday. These are another few of those items that I feel like are overhyped, especially in the media. We see a lot of stories about the crowds and whatnot, but we were talking about this right before we came on. Walmart wasn't that busy this morning. It didn't look that busy to me this morning. I drove by Target and a couple malls on my way back to Rochester last night after Thanksgiving, and it looked like an ordinary Saturday afternoon. That's how I would describe the traffic.
Well, I have to tread a little bit lightly working in an advertising-supported medium. So a lot of people are spending money, presumably with us, to tell people to go shop. So I wouldn't presume to tell them not to. But I think it's almost what happened was Black Friday became a thing. The comparison I make is Super Bowl commercials. The first few years before the whole world kind of caught on, it was pretty neat. When it became a thing, I think is when it jumped the shark, and now it just gets sillier and sillier. So, I mean, we've had Black Friday week, and it's just been going on forever. And I don't know when the change took place, but according to retail experts, somewhere in the last few years, this day is no longer the busiest shopping day of the year. It's actually the Saturday before Christmas.
Right,
so I think 21st. A lot of people have just said, you know what, they see those pictures of people breaking in the doors at some Walmart or something, and they go, why do I want to be part of this? The sales are going to come back. Believe me, they're going to be begging to get you in the store about December 23rd or January. We were talking about this on the show this morning, that I know some families will actually do their Christmas celebration in January so they can take advantage of the prices, because January is a dead zone for retail because everybody's all shopped out for Christmas. So that's when you really get the best deals.
And I think I don't think there's more or less shoppers now. I think it's just spread out further.
Yeah, I think so. And obviously online is taking its share. I mean, it's very convenient. We all use Amazon. We all use various websites. So, I mean, definitely support your small businesses locally on Saturday, and you got your Giving Tuesday and your Cyber Monday. I decided that next Wednesday, I think we should make Apathy Wednesday. After we've had all these other things, let's take a day and just not care about anything.
And I think a lot of people would jump on board with you about that one, especially since now it rolls. It's every day. It is, this weekend is the one that everybody focuses on, but it's 4 straight weekends until Christmas. So you mentioned one of the items that we're going to get to chat a little bit about here. Governor Cuomo fired back at critics in a scathing op-ed last week over the Amazon HQ2 deal. He called the deal, and I'm going to go through a bunch of the sort of talking points here. He called the deal, which includes upwards of $1.5 billion in incentives, an historic transformative moment for the entire New York City region. He called opponents of the deal extreme conservatives and socialists, and that incentives are simply a necessity in economic development. He also said that the upside for taxpayers is tremendous, 25 to 40,000 jobs paying an average of $150,000 a year. Cuomo also managed to blast the news media, in particular the New York Post, which he said is representative of extreme conservatives. He called their criticism of the deal factually baseless, and he blasted the idea of lowering taxes on all businesses as simple and unrealistic. By the way, just a quick note here, the New York Times was also no fan of the deal, and the Times has been criticized by President Donald Trump. It's been called a liberal failing newspaper, so I guess I'm kind of confused about that parallel. So he calls the Post position politically convenient, and he just ripped. I mean, anybody who was opposed to this, he found a way to just take them down in this op-ed. He doesn't write very many op-eds. What was your reaction to the op-ed itself, in terms of just what it said and how argumentative it seemed?
Well, the funny thing is, he might have a point. We don't know yet. But if it costs $1 billion to attract somebody, and that leads to $5 billion in increased tax revenue over the next X number of years, then it is a worthwhile deal. On the other hand, a lot of the criticism, aside from the political, some of the criticisms have been that basically Amazon was only going to look at really large major metropolitan areas anyway, and that there might have been a very good chance that they might have picked New York City anyway. I don't know the answer to that. So I guess it's part of our instant reaction society where let's not bother to really run any numbers or really analyze in any way. Let's just jump in and have an opinion. I suppose there's a possibility that it'll turn out to be a worthwhile expenditure of tax dollars. But it also goes back to the conversation we've had before about just the way economic development's done in general and picking winners and losers. If I'm some other online retailer, I'm wondering, where's my $1 billion?
Yeah, and I guess the part of it that, if you take the politics out of it, a lot of people seem to be concerned about the fact that it sort of felt a little bit backwards. In that, instead of Amazon, trying to woo cities, it was cities trying to woo Amazon. And in the process, they did get a whole lot of data about the cities that even bid or even put in a mild bid anytime during this, what seemed like a year and a half long process. It's interesting. The thing that I came back to, and maybe you might be able to shed some light on this, does the dollar amount and the number of jobs seem reasonable? 25 to 40,000 jobs that are going to be paying an average of $150,000, all in this HQ number 2. Does that make sense, or does that? Because to me, it doesn't seem like the number that seems wild. I mean, if that pans out, that alone, I guess, might be worth $1.5 billion.
I don't know how Amazon's business model works. I do know that in almost every case, the announced number of jobs and the promised number of jobs never seems to match up when you check 5 years down the line. So that would be worthwhile for someone to file away and do a follow-up. And that's another, we kind of broadly talk about the media on these sessions, and that's another thing with the media, I think, is we kind of obsess on the story of the day And there's not a lot of that follow-up where we go back and say, okay, 5 years ago they promised this many jobs. How many did we actually get?
That's an interest, and that is probably the biggest. That's probably the biggest beef that anybody who covers this stuff or reads about this stuff regularly has with economic development in New York State. Were you troubled at all by the very clear indication that this was a New York City centric deal, despite the fact that it is a statewide, obviously a statewide program?
Well, I mean, Buffalo put in a bid, but that's Amazon's history has shown they want to be in major areas, and there's advantages. I don't know. These jobs that pay $150,000 a year, these are obviously not guys down on the floor packing boxes to be shipped out. These are executives. So if I'm an executive and I fly around a lot, do I want to be in New York City where I can get on a plane and go to anywhere on earth? Or do I want to be in upstate New York where I have to drive to Rochester or Syracuse, catch a plane, change at some hub airport, and have it be longer and more difficult for me to travel? So, that goes back to the whole upstate versus downstate issue. The people and the money and the transportation infrastructure and all of that is in downstate New York, and there's nothing we're going to be able to do about that.
So one of the media side items that I wanted to talk to you about with this one was the blasting of the Post. Now, obviously, the Post is a more conservative-leaning news organization. That said, Governor Cuomo he's starting to catch a little more heat, it feels like, for being or appearing to have this position of anti-media, anti-press. Obviously, not to the level of President Donald Trump, but at the same time, we're starting to see, or at least the folks that I talk to, they're starting to see some parallels that they might not have seen before. Is that your read too? Do you sort of see that a little bit?
I see the Cuomo for President 2020 campaign getting underway. So we have a current president who got to the White House in part by picking on the media. So if Andrew Cuomo can do it from the other side politically, then why not, if it's an effective tactic? I don't think it's any secret he wants to be president, and so he's looking at it as, I brought all these great jobs to New York City, and all anybody's doing is giving me grief for it. So, I think he's starting to wind into presidential mode.
So to that end, he also, I believe it was in a separate interview, he came out and said that he was the voice for upstate New York. I'm assuming you caught that one.
Yeah.
You're laughing, so you definitely caught it. What do you make of that? And especially coming out of the elections, we were talking about this just a couple weeks ago, how upstate didn't really seem to match pace with what New York City ultimately did. How do you react to that? I
think the governor has to say certain things to make nice with upstate New York, but basically if you took the 57 western and northernmost counties in the state and cut them off, he'd still be elected governor with the votes of the other 5. The realistic, it's just political math. There we go with upstate versus downstate again. But if your base of power and most of the votes you get are downstate, who are you going to work the hardest for? And it's downstate. Auburn got its money, Geneva got its money. It isn't as if he's done nothing at all for upstate.
And I think, maybe the historical, when all is said and done, when the dust settles on his legacy in New York State, maybe that's the thing that people wind up looking back at and seeing more as a token or an olive branch being extended to upstate New York rather than a really meaningful program. Because you are at the end of the day just talking about, $10 million annually for a few scattered communities. Obviously has had a ton of positive benefit for, Geneva, Watkins Glen. Now assuming, Penn Yan continues to get through this process, they too will benefit. But it's a little bit strange listening to some of the things that he says now. And I think to myself, imagine this story dropping before Election Day. Can you imagine what that would have done just to the race itself? And then, you look at that wide margin that he had over Molinaro, that could have been, nearly erased with how polarized the reaction has been to the Amazon deal alone.
Well, the governor is notoriously thin-skinned. I think that's a lesson a lot of politicians could take, is you don't have to answer every criticism thrown your way. Sometimes, don't take the bait. Let that pitch go by for a ball and swing at the next one. So I think that he's looking at being president in 2020, and he doesn't like being criticized. And the image I think the image he sees of himself in his own mind is a guy who's done a heck of a lot for his state, and how come all those nasty newspapers and media people don't agree? I mean, I think there's sometimes just that disconnect between people in public office. They feel like they're doing what's best, and they don't understand why the media doesn't just crown them and say, yes, you're wonderful.
Yeah, and that, I think there's going to be a lot of interesting discussion that takes place now over the next several months. Obviously, Democrats have taken control of both legislative chambers. They have the governor's support, obviously. They say they're going to be pushing through a lot of bills that they haven't been able to in the past. They're saying that it's going to be a transformational session for both chambers this coming year, and I have to wonder now. Obviously, the governor's going to be sort of peeking and sort of showing his hand a little bit about what he wants to do for 2019. But do you think there's going to be more? Because I kind of feel like this is going to be underwhelming, and probably for a lot of the reasons that you described before, where the governor's now getting more focused on running for president, it would seem, and 2019 is going to be pretty important for him on that front. So we might see more big sort of flashy policy and less nuanced policy that actually has a real tangible impact on, the day-to-day life.
Well, it's interesting to me just because in New York, it doesn't seem like the legislature has very much power to begin with. It seems to me that most of what actually gets done in terms of policy is in the budget process, which is almost completely under the control of the governor. I'm still just baffled every year at the way some of this budget process goes, at things that have no spending component or seeming budgetary component of any kind being included in the budget. So I'm not really sure what it is the legislature thinks that it can do that it couldn't already have done before. I mean, it's pretty much in New York, whatever the governor wants, he pretty much can do.
And that's, and now, upstate, we have a lot of representation that's Republican. And, the one way that I sort of see a scenario that could hurt some of the communities in the Finger Lakes would be some of the funding that maybe we've seen annually or seen pushed into various spending packages. Maybe that might subside a little bit. But, I think there's a lot of programs still that the governor and the state has been pushing that we don't really know what's going on. I think of the HAB study that was taking place this year, like $65 million. Are we going to see more of those? And how much real benefit are we going to see in terms of proven numbers? I mean, the Excelsior Scholarship is also another good example of, it's a program that's running and it's clearly helping some people, obviously taking the tuition cost out of the equation. But we haven't really seen any big celebration from, the Governor Cuomo camp or Democrats or any of the people who supported that to begin with, saying, hey, look at all these awesome numbers, where it's just kind of, if it's going to be more of that, I think a lot of upstate sort of rural voters might be able to just sort of tough it out and deal with it until Governor Cuomo's out of the equation.
I can see what you're saying, but I think on the other hand, I wouldn't be surprised to see him just ladle out as much money as he can everywhere just to be able to start that presidential campaign and say, look at all the great things. I mean, politically, as far as the state is concerned, upstate doesn't have a lot of power, but when you're getting ready to run a campaign for president, you really don't want anybody kind of inside the tent grumbling. So, to me, this would be the time to just roll out every single benefit program you could to anybody in the state, no matter where, and then be able to launch your campaign and say, look what I've done in New York. We've lowered tuition, and we've replaced the Tappan Zee Bridge, and we fixed Penn Station, and we brought Amazon to New York City. And just, I mean, that's what any politician wants, is a big list of accomplishments he can tout.
So another one of the, do you want to talk about state initiatives? How about cashless tolling? Matthew Driscoll, executive director of the New York State Thruway Authority, said many drivers already use EasyPass for convenience, and that over the next few years, say goodbye to paying cash for any tolls on the Thruway. An all-electronic tolling system will be in place by 2020. A lot of folks voiced concerns about the jobs that would be lost, those toll booth workers. But he recommended that everybody get an EasyPass. That will be the safest and surest way to know that users' vehicles will be accounted for correctly. They will be sending a bill, so you'll just sort of drive. You'll treat it like a non-toll booth road, essentially, and you'll just drive through. How do you feel? This is something that's been discussed forever, I feel like. Technology finally catching up with the whole toll collection system. It's happened in other states. I believe Ohio, the last time I was driving through Ohio, I believe they did such on the turnpike. What is your reaction to that aggressive timeline? Because now it seems like we're going from not hearing about it at all to get ready, in about a year, it's going to be happening everywhere.
Well, I love it. I've had an EasyPass for a long time. I travel in Massachusetts a lot. They're tollless or cashless now, so it just... you don't have to stop and roll your window down and fish out quarters and dollar bills if you're that type. I mean, as far as the EasyPass goes, you still have to slow down. One of the things about the cashless tolling is they take all the toll booths out and you don't have to slow down. So there's no more, when you get off to go to the fairgrounds in Syracuse, you don't have to slow down and go 5 or 20 miles an hour through the booth. You just drive at full highway speed and it records the toll. So yeah, jobs are going to get lost, and that's where we're going in almost every industry with automation replacing people. It's happened in broadcasting. It's happened in, probably the Amazon warehouse, and so now it's coming to tolling. But just from a convenience standpoint, it seems kind of backwards with the technology we have to still have to slow down and go 5 miles an hour. And really, the funny thing is, your EasyPass will be read just as easily going 65. It's just the width of the booth. So once they tear down the booths and they have the overhead things, you just go at highway speed. So if you're a frequent traveler of the Thruway, for 4 or 5 hour trips, you get 10 or 15 minutes knocked off your trip now.
So I guess that the question or the concern that I had about it was that last quote that I had read from that story, I believe it was CNY Central who posted it. All of the things were going to be instituted by 2020, but he still said the safest and surest way to make sure that users' cars are counted correctly would be to get an EasyPass, which begs the question, is there some sort of gap? And this is what I'm genuinely curious about. Is there some sort of gap in the technology that they're not necessarily talking publicly about, where they aren't certain that they're going to be able to, with high confidence, bill everyone appropriately?
Well, there's a few different concerns. One concern is that if you don't have the EasyPass and you're doing it by license plate, they still send you an old-fashioned bill, which you have to pay. Mm-hmm. With an EasyPass, it's deducted from your account automatically. Right. So now you're going to have an outstanding pool of money out there that you have to collect, some of which you're not going to collect. I mean, that's just always going to be the case. So I think that's kind of the issue is with EasyPass, it's deducted out of your account instantly. The state has your money the second you go through the booth. With the license plate reader, they still have to send you a bill, and if you decide not to pay it, then it's a lot of hassle and cost to track you down, maybe put you through a law enforcement process over $1.75 or something. One
of the things that I had heard, and I don't know if this is still part of the plan or not, but one of the fixes to that was going to be a sped up registration suspension system, where after like a year or maybe 2 years, if a toll goes unpaid, it would go to registration suspension. So bang, your car is neutralized, I guess. It's interesting. I mean, I'm all for it because, bring us forward into the technological world, and it'll certainly speed things up. And I've always kind of marveled at the fact that there aren't more accidents at the toll booths, because you'll be, or, God forbid, even worse, those poor workers having to sort of play Frogger across trying to get back to their trailer where they actually, are based out of. it's like, oh my God, accidents, people getting hit, all of these things that seem to not happen very often. This will certainly make things safer, I'd assume.
Yeah, no, well, but going back to what you said about the registration suspension, I think another complaint has been that on a couple of occasions people have been dinged unfairly for a violation or something when they really shouldn't have. So, how long after we institute that, do we get the first story of some poor guy that had his registration yanked when it turns out he wasn't even on the highway that day, through some kind of glitch or something?
Well, and then, so let's compound that with the idea of what does your license plate look like?
Right, and see, I'm not 100% sure on that technology. Is it just simply a photo?
Because mine's like probably 70 to 75% readable right now.
Right.
But because I go through the car wash so often and I'm on the Thruway every day, it's getting bad. It'll probably be destroyed within 6 months. Can it still read without the color contrast?
I don't know. That's because I'm not sure if it's just. I can see where we might go at some point eventually where we just all have a chip in our car that gets activated or something for that type of thing. But I'm assuming that these plate readers are just simply taking a photo, which is then probably digitally enhanced or whatever to make it readable. So I can see a situation where if you've just been out hunting in the woods in your pickup truck and it's all mud on the back that it can't read the plate,
So then the part that I thought about after I read the story was, wait, why not just give everybody easy passes? So it has the magnetic reader, which I think is what's inside the actual easy pass itself. So, why not just use that for every motorist, period, rather than, that kind of goes to the chip
I don't know
idea.
I don't know what one of those units costs to make, or if there are going to be some kind of fraud or black market on easy passes somewhere. I don't know.
So, local item that I wanted to talk about, just because next week I'm going to be having Peter Mandius in studio. The Seneca Army Depot is, as it turns out, contaminated with carcinogens at levels up to 1,327 times the federal health advisory limit. Mantius reports that officials do not yet know the extent of the plumes of underground pollution, but the DEC has said that the U.S. Army will be starting additional site investigation this coming spring. Community leaders are calling on Governor Cuomo to establish strong maximum contamination levels and begin widespread testing for those chemicals. The most contaminated site is a former fire training pad. It's approximately 1,000 feet west of an apartment complex and also near the Romulus Central School. Those obviously rely on public water systems, so wouldn't be directly affected, hopefully. But several farms and homes that are near the polluted sites do rely on private wells. You've been around a long time. You know as well as I do that, pollution and radiation and virtually everything has been discussed at that site. Obviously, now in the last couple of years, there's been some economic development efforts happening there. What is your reaction to hearing that type of uncertainty, even still, after all these years, about something that seems like it should be pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and pretty damn public?
I think some lawyers are about to make a whole bunch of money. I think there are going to be all kinds of lawsuits filed against the Army saying that you knew this stuff was here, and why didn't you disclose it when we started trying to redevelop this property for civilian use?
And it's interesting, too, because hasn't the Army been out of the equation down there for something like 17 or 18 years? And the IDA had it, and now you have private ownership of part of the property. Just a really interesting, and of course, Peter's going to be in studio. He'll be on the debrief next Friday. We're going to talk about that and a bunch of other environmental issues. We're at the end, and I want to get your reaction because this is one of those ones that you pay attention to a lot. HABs. We're at the end, it seems, officially of the HAB season. Do we feel any better now than we did at the start of the season regarding any of the, we talked for a minute about the study, but just in general about how this season went compared to last season? It seems like we had more outbreaks, had more coverage in local news. Do you think we're getting a handle on this at all? Or do you think it's going to be more of the same next year?
So far, it doesn't look like we are, because I have Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association come on my program once a month, and they talk about it, and nobody seems to know yet, why it's getting worse. And I'm not sure how concerned we need to be at this point. I mean, if there's a floating bit of slime that's 100 feet wide on a 40-mile long lake, is that really, gloom and doom? Now, I know the idea is, well, if it keeps spreading, people aren't going to come visit lakes that aren't clean, and that's true. But there's so much alarmism that goes around environmental issues sometimes. I'm not sure yet if this is one of those issues or if this is something we really legitimately need to be worried about.
So obviously, not only environmental issues that were talked about a lot during the last election cycle, but a couple local representatives are getting some national attention now that they've won new terms. John Katko, who represents the 24th, and then Tom Reed, who represents the 23rd. Katko is being discussed for the lead Republican seat on the House Homeland Security Committee, and then Tom Reed has been getting all sorts of positive press from the president, obviously. Your reaction to all of that positive attention, obviously those were races that we expected to be kind of tight or tighter than normal. Are we now seeing that those wins were really consequential? Well,
I guess I was a little bit, disturbed is a good word, but the idea that was first floated by Congressman Reed, that we need to do something about the partisan divide in Congress, and that he would support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker if in turn the Democrats would give up some of their power because the majority has too much power in Congress, to which my response was, well, your side was the majority for the last several years. Why did it only become a problem when your side lost the majority? So I'm still having a little bit of trouble with this whole them portraying themselves as being very bipartisan. They are compared to other people, but when you vote 90% of the time with your own party, how bipartisan are you? On the other hand, I mean, if our congressmen are increasing their stature and power, that should be a good thing for upstate New York. So if Democrats can't win seats in upstate New York and Republicans can, and they can use that power for some good to help us, then so be it. Good for them.
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree with that. It's just, I guess I was surprised when I started to hear that there were any Republicans interested in supporting Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. I was obviously interested to see if there would even be enough resistance within the Democratic Party itself to possibly push her out.
Well, the whole thing strikes me as kind of a ploy, because one of the narratives that media love to push are Democrats in disarray. Nancy Pelosi, at the moment, doesn't have enough votes to become Speaker. But there will be a vote in the Democratic caucus. If Nancy Pelosi gets the majority of votes, she will be the Democratic choice for Speaker. If you're one of the Democrats who doesn't support her, are you going to keep not supporting her and be on the wrong side of someone who's about to become the Speaker? Or are you going to jump ship and go, yeah, I'm okay with her now? I mean, people like to go with the winner. So generally what happens, even if she wins by one vote in the Democratic caucus, when it comes to a floor vote, no Democrat is going to vote against the choice from their own party and allow the minority party to get the speakership for the first time ever. So to me, the whole story is a lot of much ado about nothing. Nancy Pelosi will be the Speaker.
And which, honestly, as far as somebody who's always talking about getting more young people involved in politics, and it seemed like we had, I think the numbers support it, that there were more young and particular women running this last time around and that got elected than ever before. So, it does sort of raise questions about the it's not establishment. That's not the right word. I don't think anyway. But it does sort of raise questions about how much power the quote-unquote old guard ultimately has in deciding what happens in our various political systems. And I think that might be one of the bigger reasons why people just get frustrated and say, well, to hell with this, I just don't care.
Well, they have a lot of power, but it's going to come in increments. I mean, that's one of the things that's going to happen as part of this process now is if Pelosi wants to become the speaker, she's going to have to make some concessions to this new wave of younger Democrats. Those are a lot of the ones who are against her right now. So I think she will make some deals where you'll see the likes of Ocasio-Cortez and some of this new wave of Democrats. I think they'll get more power, but it doesn't change overnight. They'll get power over time, but for now, the old guard is still going to have a lot of it. But I think over time, as this new wave enters politics, I think they'll begin to see the ways to power for themselves.
And of course, Tracy Matrano is running for Congress. Oh my God! I cannot believe that it literally took less than 2 weeks for anyone to announce that they were running in 2020. What is your reaction? I know you guys talked about it a little bit on the show this week.
I don't know what the point of announcing this soon is. I don't know what is to be gained by announcing this soon. Because remember, she wasn't the choice of her own party. She had to beat back that party establishment you talk about to get the nomination in the first place. And then, despite spending and raising a lot of money, it really wasn't all that close a race. So, I guess it's to head off any other sort of insurgents who might be thinking about giving it a go, that maybe if she announces first, anybody else is going to say, well, she's already got the organization, she's got the fundraising apparatus, I'm going to stay out. So that's the only thing I can think of is that was just a preemptive move to make sure any other particular Democrat who might want to go next time just says, I'm out.
Well, and that, to me, that just raises the whole question again about the false choice that Democrats were sort of volleying back and forth. If you talk to anybody who wasn't in what I would consider to be a staunch Democrat, she very much appeared and acted like a mainstream Democrat, the kind of Democrat that, reminded more people of Hillary Clinton's campaign and less of some of the, up-and-coming outside-the-box candidates, Cortez, et cetera, that we saw this last time around. Nate McMurray, people like that. It raises this question about what the party sees itself as versus what everyone sees it as. And in this case, I'm not even sure that she was the strongest candidate to be put against Tom Reed this last time around. And now you're already sort of pigeonholing yourself, I guess, would be the idea if you are, within the party and saying, this is what I care about, this is what I want to move forward with.
Yeah, there's always a little dichotomy between the party apparatus itself and the party's voters. Clearly, the Democratic Party voters are moving a little bit more left, and they're embracing more openly liberal, or dare I even say socialist policies. But the party itself, where the money comes in and where they decide how it gets spent, always tends to be a little bit more mainstream. I mean, you always see the old thing about you win your primary and then you immediately kind of tack towards the middle. So I think there's going to be a lag between this new wave of Democrats and these younger voters getting interested in politics and actually moving the party machinery. I mean, it's kind of a glacial pace. That's why I say it's going to take time if this change is going to happen. And that's one of the things that these newer, younger people have to understand is that it's a long process and you have to stay engaged in it. You can't just, like the Bernie supporters who gave up when Bernie lost to Hillary and said, well, that's it, I'm done, everything's all crooked. If you want to affect the process, you have to stay in it. You have to work within the political process that we have.
Mm-hmm. And it is interesting. Are we now at a point where it is 100% nonstop campaigning? Have we gotten there?
We have at any kind of federal office. I mean, not so much maybe for assembly or state senate, but yeah, if you're a Congress, I think the figure I heard once is you have to raise something like $10,000 a day starting from day one. So when these new electees, when Ocasio-Cortez takes her seat in her office in January, one of the first things she'll be doing is making fundraising calls. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the name of the game. So yeah, it is. It's 24/7 every year, nonstop for pretty much Congress and above at this point.
So then, obviously, it looks like we have a resolution or close to final results in the Nate McMurray race. Obviously, challenging Chris Collins, embattled, indicted, throw whatever title you want on it. It would really be a pretty shocking outcome, I think, for a lot of people who pay attention to politics. It might not be as much of a surprising outcome for people who don't pay close attention to politics and don't understand the scope of the charges against Collins. But with a result in mind, or what seems like a result in mind now, where does that leave us in our elected or political system? It seems to leave us, in my opinion, it seems to leave us in a pretty damn depressing place.
Well, if you're a Republican, you've been conditioned now for a couple of years to believe that the news media, especially when it reports derogatory information about your side, is fake. So I'm guessing a lot of Republicans went to the polls thinking that the charges against Chris Collins are fake, and obviously he is due his time in court and his presumption of innocence like anyone. But if there were ever an open and shut case, I mean, the documentation is there. He got messages, this stock's about to tank. He immediately contacted all his buddies who had the stock and said, dump it, and they dumped it. I mean, those are pretty undeniable facts.
It's interesting, too, because now I talk to, you talk to some Republicans, and, I do not live in that district, but I am a registered Republican, and you talk to these people who consider themselves pretty in line with the party and pretty in line with what the party thinks ideologically. And, there's even some surprise there. And I know a lot, I know some of those folks didn't vote for him. Some of my friends who live in that district didn't vote for him and would have ordinarily. And he doesn't really seem to have too many really strong supporters now. So where does that leave him moving forward into a new legislative cycle where he's going to have to now that he won, actually represent the 27th district while also fending off what will probably be a very difficult legal battle for himself?
Yeah, I mean, he's entitled to the full defense and the full presumption of innocence, but I would be very shocked if he isn't convicted of securities fraud and removed from office in whatever amount of time that process takes, because the speedy trial clause doesn't mean what it used to be. So I guess he'll do the job to the best of his ability, but almost certainly he'll be replaced in a few months, I would think.
So then, obviously, now that the election's over, the last topic I wanted to sort of talk about with you was just the state of media exiting election season, really putting it in the rear view mirror, moving forward. Media getting into a better place, worse place, or pretty much just the same?
I don't see it having changed a lot. Mm-hmm. I'm beginning to we're beginning to see more of presidential misstatements being labeled as such. The media seem a little more willing to say President Trump said today, and the truth is something else. But I think they could do a better job of earning trust. I mean, I think that the media could do a little less focusing on pointless conflict and a little more on what does this really mean to you and what do you need to know. Now, I know if I told that to the average television news director, he'd tell me, and nobody would watch a station like that. So it's kind of chicken and egg. I mean, do we blame the media for the state of the media, or are they simply delivering what the consumer wants?
And that, I think that's after this past election cycle, I'm asking myself, has the consumer gotten any wiser or any better about the product they're consuming, or more knowledgeable about the product that they're consuming? And are we getting any further away from the desire to just live in an echo chamber?
We may, but I don't see it a lot yet. I still, I see a public that just is very often lacking in critical thinking skills. Not that I'm the brightest guy in the world, but I'm in the middle of this thing all the time, so I pay a lot of attention to news. I think I have a pretty good BS detector, so when I see something on Facebook that doesn't make any sense, I dismiss it, and a lot of people just forward it on. And then I have to go on Snopes and find that it's false and post a link and show them, and then it's my family and friends, and they're not my family and friends anymore. So,
well, okay. So that actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we do have a couple extra minutes, and I did want to get your take on that. So, did you hear about the Pew Research study about fake news? They basically had two groups, 18 to 49 years old, and then 50 plus, and they showed 10 statements, 5 factual, 5 opinion. And they basically weighed the two groups against each other to see who could better identify, or who at all could identify fact from opinion. And the numbers actually came back where young people were 18 to 49 demographic was overwhelmingly better at identifying fact versus opinion. And I had to wonder, just judging from the things that I see on social media like Facebook, how much of that is just driven by sort of the fake or clearly fraudulent things that we've seen over the years on social media, where we're conditioned, young people are conditioned, or even people who just consume news all the time are conditioned to be able to identify that as, oh no, Donald Trump didn't jump off of the Eiffel Tower. Like that is completely false.
Well, I don't know that has so much to do with social media. I just think as we get older, we tend to, our opinions kind of harden, and it's harder to dislodge them. So I think maybe younger people that haven't got as fully formed opinions are maybe better able to determine between the fake and the real.
It's interesting, because I really do think that there's a presentation aspect to it, because it's like, I've listened to my parents before. I've encountered it with some of the, my grandparents' generation, where they'll see something on Facebook in particular, whether it's something someone shared, or whether it's some, an article or something like that, or just a straight up post, and they will misread the way it's packaged. So-and-so shares someone else's post, and they'll say, did you see what that person said who shared? And it's like, no. Right. And it's like, at what point do we really have to start being more guarded for that older generation that doesn't have the parsing skills, I guess, to really be able to, see for what it is, or how it's being labeled and how it's being given to the user? Well,
and see, it's also the younger people have grown up in this culture of fake news, so that's all they know. Older people, it's the same reason why, it's the older people, the sheriff's department's always warning about these telephone scams and things, because older people grew up in a time, sadly, I guess, when people told the truth, and if somebody called you and said they were your nephew and in trouble and needed money, they really were. And now that's not so much the case. So I hope we move forward from here. It is kind of sad, especially when you're in the information business like we are, to see so much misinformation, and you just want to, after a time you kind of throw your hands up. I mean, like I said, I was only half joking a moment ago about family and friends. When you see someone who's really close to you who is terribly misinformed about something, do you run the risk of alienating them to correct them when they probably won't believe you anyway? Or do you just click X and close your browser and go do something else?
Yeah, it is. That's a really interesting, and we didn't talk about it, but I'm sure there were plenty of uncomfortable moments yesterday around the Thanksgiving table, around the region, around the state, around the country.
Sure.
Having some of these conversations that not just uncomfortable, but they probably didn't happen 10 or 15 years ago.
I'm sure, and I'm sure leads to some real difficulties sometimes. I mean, those arguments can get out of hand in a hurry.
All right, so for our viewers and listeners, where can they hear you? Where can they hear you on a daily basis?
The Finger Lakes Morning News, 5:30 to 9 weekday mornings on Finger Lakes News Radio. That is 95.9 FM, 1240 AM, WGVA in Geneva, 98.1 FM, 1590 AM, WAUB in Auburn.
All right, thanks a lot, Ted.
And they can hear us every Friday morning at 6:50 during the show talking about some of these same topics.
Yes. That is going to do it for us today. We'll be back next Friday with Peter Mandius of the Waterfront blog. We'll be talking about all of the latest environmental news in the Finger Lakes. In the meantime, though, don't forget to check out Finger Lakes Morning News with Ted and company on all those stations that he just named. And also go ahead and visit fingerlakes1.com or download our app for Android and iOS. We'll see you next week, and have a happy and safe holiday weekend.